Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Monday, February 23rd, 2026, and today we're talking about growing for green tomatoes and not the heirloom type of green tomatoes and fats in the compost pile. So let's do it. All right, happy Monday, everyone. I hope you all had lovely weekends. Hopefully you got some good work done and some good rest done, or both if you needed it. My attention, what little I have left, is slowly turning to soccer season, with this weekend being one of the big ones where we get all the coaches together for the coaches meeting before the season starts a week from today, which is wild, especially considering it is very, very cold outside right now, and there is a blizzard happening up in the Northeast. So the idea of being outside playing soccer feels far-fetched, but soon enough. It's amazing how quickly March, in fact, turns to tolerable outdoor conditions. And sure, we can get some good, cold and snow over the next 2 months, but the chances are most days it will be manageable. Good hoodie weather. After a long, cold winter, I'm definitely ready for it. The Olympics are also over, sadly, and I enjoyed the games thoroughly this year. Set me back a lot on my work, so that was good. Apologies to my Canadian friends, but I definitely enjoyed some hockey this weekend, gotta say. Great sport. I played hockey a ton when I was growing up, mostly street hockey, but I love ice sports in general. They are probably some of the oldest sports we have, like where ancient peoples would, use the ice to play games in the winter. Games like hitting a rock with a stick for points, or just racing around or across frozen ponds and lakes. Love that stuff. Has me daydreaming about building a rink in our backyard for next winter, for the kids, or really just for myself. If you don't live in a place with winter sports, bring the winter sports to you, as they say. Somebody probably says that. Also, wanted to say I was really heartened by the response to Friday's show. Got lots of notes on Patreon and here, and great comments about it on the video itself. I felt optimistic when I recorded it, but seeing that response made me feel like my optimism was warranted, which is a nice feeling. So anyway, more on that particular subject later. And if you're like, what particular subject, might I suggest Friday's episode of Growers Daily? So it is Monday, where every week this year we are digging into a single less talked about crop in a series we're calling Planting and Raving. Dad probably named that. That dad was probably named Jesse. Today, the crop we're going to cover is the great green tomato. Now, you might ask, isn't growing a green tomato the same as growing a red tomato or purple or yellow, etc., but just, not all the way? Well, yes. In fact, that's it. Great episode. Everyone go home. Thank you so much. So, no. Well, it can be that, but this is a topic that I talked about with some growers at the Oak Conference this season, and maybe also last year too. But I think this green tomato thing is a really good idea for market gardeners to think about if they don't already. The green tomato has so much potential as a market crop and a restaurant crop, often fetching as much or close to as much as your average red tomato, though I've also heard some growers say they can actually charge more for green tomatoes. So let's talk about it. First, for varieties. I'm not sure that one variety necessarily makes more sense than another for the green tomato, but I will say that if the end goal is a green tomato, then this is where determinate tomatoes can really shine. For the uninitiated, there are determinate and indeterminate tomatoes. The indeterminate tomatoes are your classic tomatoes that put on fruit slowly over the course of the season or a couple months. The determinants, by contrast, are fast and dump all of their fruit like that they're going to make in a season on you pretty much all at once. So indeterminates are kind of like a CSA of plants, and determinates are kind of like the Sam's Club, where you get a good deal, but you get it in bulk all kind of at once. Anyway, for green tomatoes, determinants shine because they are typically faster into production, need very little trellising, and give you a lot of bulk to work with all at once, which works out well with green tomatoes because they store reasonably well. So you can just harvest them and put them in a cellar temperature, just slowly maturing, which would be like at the same temperature as regular tomatoes, roughly 50 to 55 degrees preferably. So the idea being to grow a bed of green tomatoes, harvest everything, and then flip that bed to the next crop. So perhaps one option or one idea with this is to grow a bed of determinate green tomatoes, harvest everything off of that bed, and then flip that bed to the next crop, unlike regular indeterminate tomatoes that for many of us, depending on where you live, might be the only crop that bed sees in a season or one of two. That is another big advantage of finding a market for this crop, for a crop like green tomatoes. It goes from being in the ground for a whole season like regular tomatoes to being in and out in enough time for more produce out of the same space, which is always going to be your best profit center, is just growing more out of the same space. Of course, you can also just harvest some green tomatoes off of your regular tomato plants and then also later harvest ripe ones. And that goes for heirlooms and slicers alike. But in this case, I'm talking about bulk. So yes, now Marketing a large bulk of green tomatoes could be tricky, but it's really about starting now, looking for wholesale accounts who might be interested, from restaurants to retailers. Ask your chefs if they would be interested in green tomatoes in June. At least around here, we can get them by June, but maybe it's early July for you. Ask small restaurants and retailers if they have a supplier, for green tomatoes in general. If not, get them to commit to a certain amount of weight if you can. Just say, I'm going to grow this much if you all promise to buy it. Selling these may be easier in the southern U.S., obviously, or places with a history with things like fried green tomatoes than other areas, but you never know. There may be cultural uses for them in any country or any area. Then you could grow successions all through the summer and even do a bulk later in the season to harvest and bring them well into the fall or even the winter, like just having them in the cooler and take them out as needed. This could be a great long season crop for the right farm. And of course, farmers markets can be a good option too. If I were selling at a farmer's market like green tomatoes and really trying to make that a focus, I would probably not quite bring as much bulk and would instead use indeterminate tomatoes to spread out the harvest a little bit and simply plant more regular tomatoes and steal, the green ones that I need. And as for price, you're looking at roughly $2 a pound or more wholesale, or $3 or more for retail, which would be like farmers markets, depending on the market, because it's a specialty item. A lot of people would prefer, to let their tomatoes ripen to get that extra $2 to $4 a pound, but not you, green tomato grower. You are smart and see the value in growing something fast and moving it in bulk and having something to harvest off of those plants, 10 days earlier than those who wait for just the red ones, which can dramatically increase your profitability if done right. So anyway, we're going to talk a bit more about production and harvesting in the third segment, but let's talk about some fat composting, PHAT, and actually FAT, fat as well. Both really. BRB.
Hi, Jesse, here in Springville, Utah. We got some nice mountains here in the back. This is my high-tech grow box that I use to propagate all my plants for my backyard garden. I put concrete pavers in here to trap some heat during the day. It's heated with a crock pot filled with sand and a 48-inch heat mat. It's got a thermostat here that kicks on these fans to cool it down. It blows cold air in and hot air out. It works perfect for my sized garden.
Today's episode is brought to you by Tend. Farming is hard, running it shouldn't be. Meet Tend, the purpose-built platform built by farmers for farmers. Plan your season, map your farm, and track every task from seed to sale. No more spreadsheets, no more guesswork, just smart, seamless workflows. Tend adapts to your farm, 1 acre or 100. Real-time inventory, sales, labor, tracking, traceability, and analytics all in one place. You grow food, flowers, fruit, and more. Tend helps you to grow smarter. Start free today at tend.com. That's TEND.com. All right, back to the show. If you, the listener or viewer, are enjoying this podcast, getting even a small amount of value from it, consider supporting our work over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I will try to get to questions from everywhere that questions come in, but I will always get to your Patreon questions. Now, today's Patreon question comes to us from Patreon member Christine Bell, who writes, quote, "Happy New Year, Jesse and family." Obviously a January question. "I have a composting question. I have access to an abattoir and have considered composting the waste products, intestines, stomach, etc., combined with an unlimited amount of easily accessible wood chips. I've tried it once so far and have discovered that once the pile heats up, the residual fats liquefy and pool, then solidify near the base of the piles. These are large piles that I can flip with my small Kubota tractor, and once flipped, they are distributed throughout the pile. My question is, do you know of any problems I might be introducing to my garden using this compost? I've only applied it to a few 30-foot beds so far this past fall and have long winter with about 1 foot of snow covering it at the moment. Thank you for all you do and keep up the amazing work," end quote. Okay, thank you. And first, I have to say how cool it is to have all that nitrogen and carbon access. I find that for a lot of people, it's like I have, this carbon, but no nitrogen, or I have this nitrogen, but no carbon. But rarely do you run into a ton of people who have good access to both. So that's awesome. All right. So there are a couple things to consider here. First is that, as you have likely learned at this point, critters are going to be all about those fats. This isn't a deal breaker in using them by any means, just something to be thoughtful about, especially if you live in bear country, which maybe you do with a foot of snow on your beds for the whole winter, but it doesn't have to be bears. It could be rats, dogs, all sorts of stuff will be eager to dig in there. But in general, in terms of the garden, after you incorporate the fats and let that cure for a bit, I don't see any major issues. If it continues to pool in the composting process, you may want to add another round of wood chips or maybe even like sawdust or something sprinkled right on top of that fat before you incorporate it with the rest of the compost pile to boost the carbon and oxygen access for the microbes. And then you would have to allow for a slightly longer curing than normal. So albeit maybe slightly slower than your average material, fats will eventually decompose, and that compost should be good to go for garden use as long as it's cured. Decomposed fats do run the risk of simply, being delectable in the garden to those critters as well, where you may not want the critters digging around. So that curing stage will be important to just let them, further decompose until they are less tasty. The duration of the curing stage will depend a bit on the size of the pile, the amount of fat, and how well it was incorporated. But if you could wait arbitrarily something like a month or so after your last turn and you don't see or smell any fats, that should be a good indication that you're good to go. I think the waste from animal meat processors is definitely a big opportunity for composters, though. I remember that one of the biggest issues with a local mobile processing unit getting off the ground here in Kentucky was not regulation necessarily, but was waste. They didn't have a good way to deal with all that viscera and blood. So in that way, I wonder if, like a composter might be able to integrate in or collaborate with a mobile processor to be able to utilize all that excess viscera. I've talked before on here about if I were someone interested in starting a compost business, I would chat with other businesses first before ever considering building my own, composting site, because it may be entirely easier to start a composting operation as a complement to a meat processor or something, or a farmer or a stockyard or whatever, than it would probably ever be to start a composting business on your own because of, all the permitting and all the things that you'd have to go through. Then it creates a little symbiosis. This is a bit of a random and perhaps less appetizing comparison, but there's one of those instant clinics here in my town, but it's set up inside of a pharmacy. However, the clinic is not associated with the pharmacy. It's a separate business entity, and then there is a medical supply place next to that, which is also a separate business. It's basically just like three businesses in one that all complement one another, and there's no reason farms can't use that same idea and operate in that same way to best utilize the land. Similar to how, for instance, Old North Farm talked about having the nonprofit set up on their farm. As a side note, I did get to try their shrub drink the other day, and it is fantastic. High recommendation. So shouts to Old North Shrub and farmer products like that. Anyway, very cool question. Great opportunity. Keep us updated on how it all goes. Otherwise, up next, we're going to take a little break and then get back to fruit that is perhaps best when fried green. It's not a sentence you say every day. Not me, at least. Be right back. Today's episode is brought to you by Certified Naturally Grown. Certified Naturally Grown is the grassroots certification built by farmers for farmers. C&G gives local growers like you recognition for the commitment of producing food without synthetic chemicals by assuring customers that your practices are verified. C&G's peer review inspection model keeps the cost of certification low while creating opportunities for knowledge sharing amongst a strong, supportive network of like-minded farmers. Apply today to be certified before the season ramps up. Applications processed within 7 days. Learn more at naturallygrown.org. All right, back to the show. All right, so we've got the whole idea of what to grow for green tomatoes locked in, but now let's actually grow them. For me, I'm never directly seeding a tomato plant. Like I'm never just putting a seed in the garden and hoping it grows. We are always starting with transplants, even in the dead of summer. That means we are starting them in soil blocks and often, but not always, potting them up to larger blocks or balls before they head out to the field. In the dead of summer, however, the only difference is that we're often just going straight from 2-inch blocks to the field, no potting up needed, because they will grow so fast in the heat by that point. I mean, you could pot them up, but it's really just not necessary. The reason for potting up is just to grow them to a more mature stage, like in the tropics of the greenhouse, for instance, before transplanting them. Ideally, you get them pretty far along, 12 inches or like 30 centimeters or so tall, at least, before transplanting. So they aren't taking up your garden space while they grow. They're doing that in the greenhouse, and then you can transplant them, and it's like go gadget plant, which is cool. Nothing really changes there in the planting. Just follow the other tomato guides we've put out for how to plant tomatoes. For bed preparation, all the same rules apply as well. Compaction must be addressed. Drainage must be taken care of. The soil must be well amended because tomatoes are a pretty heavy feeder, even the green ones. But just like any tomato, do not over nitrogen them. You would end up with abundant green leaves and no fruit, green or otherwise. An overly happy tomato plant is basically just a house plant. By that I mean a plant the size of a house, really. For tomatoes to really do their thing, they have to think their lives are at least slightly on the line to want, to make kids' fruit. For planting, we can go a little bit tighter than normal tomatoes, but nothing really changes there either, because in general, you want large fruits and to have them easy to harvest. So you're not likely to go closer than like 18 inches. That would be like 45 centimeters, but really 2 to 3 feet. So like 60 to 91 centimeters probably makes the most sense. Then again, nothing really changes. These are grown just like normal field tomatoes, no pruning. You are still lightly trellising them, even the bushier determinants, to make the plants stand up off the ground and make harvesting easier, though with green tomatoes, it might be easier to harvest off the ground without as much loss as ripe tomatoes. I would still trellis just for the ease. The amount of time it would take up to set up a simple trellis is made up for in how much time it would save you, like in trying to harvest stuff off the ground out of all that plant matter. Not super easy. For harvesting green tomatoes, every market and account will be different. Some may want literally very hard green tomatoes, while some may want them with a hint of red on them, is what we call breakers. This is when they are beginning to ripen and will start to have even a small amount of like red on the blossom end. That's when many will say the flavor is the best, but some folks may want those hard, crisp green tomatoes. You just have to ask them, and it could depend on whether or not they are pickling them or using them for fried green tomatoes or whatever. Then for harvesting, you can pile them a little deeper in a bin than you would for like ripe tomatoes, which you should never really stack on one another because they just damage each other. Just to emphasize this again, this is a crop that, not dissimilar from green peppers, speeds up the days to maturity significantly on the harvest, making it something you can get just about the same amount of money for at market, but have it fully 2 weeks or more earlier. Then again, don't store them too cold after harvest. Think cellar temperatures or wherever you would store your tomatoes, and just sell them by the pound. Start at your regular tomato price and see how that goes. Heck, you may even find you can charge more because you're the only growers bonkers enough to pick your tomatoes green. But who doesn't love a fried green tomato sandwich with a little fresh hot pepper and garlic sprinkled right on top of the actual tomato? It's delicious. Anyway, that's kind of it on that topic, but it's one I don't think I've ever gone in depth on, so that was fun. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. I look forward to hearing your all's green tomato recipes. We always get good recipes on these rantings and ravings shows. Otherwise, by Monday. Don't forget, No Till Growers is a nonprofit 501c3, so donations are tax deductible and greatly appreciated. Also, a special shout to Jillian Reynolds and Adam Morcom for their recent donation through the links in the show notes. So shouts to that. Please make sure to like and subscribe and or follow wherever you're getting this podcast. That's an easy way to help us out as well. Enormous thank you to all of our show sponsors. And if you'd ever like to sponsor the show, you can reach out to Farmer Michelle at notillgrowers.com. Huge shouts to Willie Breeding for the theme music, Mike Hilbert for the production help and editing, and my wife Hannah for absolutely everything in the world. Also, shouts to Epidemic Sound for the background music that you can hear while I get a drink of tea for my poor voice. Poor voice. That's better. Pick up a hat or a copy of my book, The Living Soul Handbook, at notillgrowers.com to support our work. Big thank you to everyone over at patreon.com/notillgrowers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, you sign up in the month of February, you get a shout on the show. So big shout outs today to Sonia S. or Sonia. Or Sonia. Maybe it's Sonia. Maybe that's what the S stands for. Rob Hazel, bumping up. Shouts to you, Rob. And Marina Pavlovich. Cool. And Steve Leavesay. Steve Leavesay. That's fun. Thank you all. Amazing. And we're gonna get a story out of this. It was a great weekend over the Patreon. Maybe Friday's episode had some people inspired. That's very cool. And as a reward, as we do every week from our Patreon members, we have a fun story. This one, we have a billionaire. Everyone loves billionaires, right? So our billionaire, well, let's call him Chad. That's a billionaire's name. Chad made his money like most ultra wealthy people in that he was born into it. But then he invested some of that money that he got in a tech idea that ultimately was successful and made him even more money and thus made him think that he was a genius, which is cool. And anyway, one day he was driving in his quite fancy car. That does most of the driving for him, honestly. But anyway, he was chatting with his longtime girlfriend, and she tells him over the phone like it's over, that she is not happy in the relationship anymore and she's met someone else. And anyway, it's done. It's over. They're, breaking up. And he's honestly pretty stunned and hurt by this. And he's very sad. And he doesn't have this feeling very often of being kind of let down, but he feels genuine sadness, and he decides, to pull over at a scenic outlook and just stop for a minute and like get out, get a breath of air. When he gets out, he sees like there's a trail off to the side, and it's kind of like a dark trail, but it looks cool. And he decides, to take a walk. He's not really an outdoorsy type, but it looked inviting, and he needed to think and just like get some energy out. And that is for tomorrow, pending signups, of course, on how much for all this? I don't know what that means. We'll find out. Thanks for watching and or listening. We'll see you tomorrow.